Hey friends, this is Audie Cornish, host of CNN This Morning and The Assignment, and guess what? Every story you care about, every angle you want unpacked is now streaming on CNN. That means you can catch my show or other CNN programming whenever you want on your favorite device. And a subscription also gets you access to exclusive video series and unlimited articles. So subscribe to CNN at cnn.com/subscription.
So hello and welcome to Vulgar History, a feminist women's history comedy podcast. My name is Anne Foster and we are in our Regency era. We're talking about various people who lived in Great Britain during the early 1800s and how the time period is maybe not as much like a Jane Austen novel as you might have thought. Although last week we talked about Jane Austen and you learned her life wasn't like a Jane Austen novel. So whose is really? Anyway, we're talking about Anne Lister, queer icon, and I have two guests who know so much more about this than I do, and that's why they're here. Our first guest is a returning guest. Kit Heyam is a writer, heritage practitioner, and trans awareness trainer. Welcome, Kit. Welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me. Lovely to be here again.
And we have a first-time guest. Sarah Wingrove is an interdisciplinary scholar working across literary studies, sociology, and histories of sexuality and gender, specializing in lesbian and queer studies from the late 18th century onwards. Welcome, Sarah.
Delighted to be on the podcast.
Anne Lister. People listen to this podcast who've maybe never heard that name. So she was a queer. Actually, you know what? Let's talk about this. What are our pronouns for Anne Lister? What's the Kit? Just raise your eyebrows. What are we going with today?
It's a great question. And used she in life. In my book, Before We Were Trans, I used they because I deliberately want to foreground the extent to which Anne Lister was certainly ambivalent about womanhood, I think, or about what womanhood meant to her in her period. So I would argue for either or perhaps both of those. What are your thoughts, Sarah?
I think I'm on the same page. In my work, I generally use she, her, and that's just because, as you said, that's what she's using in the journals, in the remaining archival documents, but I also don't see any issue with using they, she, like interchangeably with Lister, because I think, as you said, I don't think that's inaccurate to describe Lister. I think ambivalent to gender is quite a good way of phrasing it.
So for people who don't know who Anne Lister is, could either of you just give a brief overview of, who is this person? Why do we know about her?
I'm going to let Sarah do that. You're the expert, and you could give a little context on why Anne Lister is important and what your area of study is, I guess, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So Anne was born on the 3rd of April, 1791, in Halifax. She lived a very complicated life, a very busy life, really. There's so many different words that are used to describe her. Primarily, most people know her as a diarist first. She was a traveller. She was an entrepreneur. So many different words used to describe her. A landowner is another a quite key important one. But I think the most known sort of phrasing and sort of description of her is as the first modern lesbian. Is how a lot of people know her. Something that I've noticed is a lot of times when that phrase is used, first modern lesbian, no one cites where that's from. And it's from an online article by Richter Norton, who is a LGBT historian. He wrote this article about Anne Lister in the sort of early 2000s. I think it then went up on his website, I want to say around 2011, something like that, probably corresponding with the TV film, The Secret Diaries of Miss Anne Lister. But it is that blog post where he sort of uses that phrase for the first time, and then it's been picked up by lots of other people.
That really tracks, because Richter Norton is quite a fan of I think he's really invested in finding the roots of modern queer identities in especially the 18th century, which is something I feel a bit complicated about. So it's really, it really tracks that he's the origin of that phrase.
Well, and I wanted to just clarify, just in terms of the diaries, just imagining someone who's never heard of her before. So on the podcast, my listeners will have heard other people where I'm like, I talk about people from history where it's like, well, we don't know. They were roommates. They were very good friends, those sorts of things. Or like this man wrote these passionate love letters to this other man, but men just wrote letters like that back then. Like, we don't know what's going on in the bedrooms of these people. But Anne Lister, we know in detail,
great detail,
what's happening every time she gets in a bedroom with somebody else. Like, she was having sexual relations with women. We're not just being like, oh, maybe. Like, can you explain the diary, Sarah?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of my work, so I look at her journals, her travel notes, and her correspondence, and sort of connecting all those different archival documents and sort of understanding how they interact with one another. And this is, I mean, if we're talking about language, different people describe them in different ways. Some people say that they're her diaries. Some people say that they're her journals. Again, I generally describe them as journals because that's how she describes them in the text. But again, I don't think it's wrong to say diary, because that's also just the more popular term for what we have left of her archive. Runs over 5 million words. About a sixth of it was written in a single replacement cipher, which she came up with. There's sort of some speculation whether she did that in collaboration with her first known partner, Eliza Rain. And yeah, she uses that to obscure significant parts of her journal, particularly anything to do with her body, anything to do with her clothing. If there's anything that she deems as embarrassing about money, gossip. But then the really key one that we all know is her intimate relationships with women.
And the diaries, I think this is also such an interesting thing. So there's so many people in history who wrote diaries like this, and then they were like, when I die, burn this. Or descendants get rid of it, or nobody found it. So can you explain how the diary still exists, how people were able to find it, to decode it?
Yeah, absolutely. So Lister died quite suddenly, so we understand. So her last journal entry is from the 11th of August, 1840. We know that she doesn't actually die until the 22nd of September. So there's 41, 42 days in between that. We don't know what happened between them, whether she was writing another journal that we haven't got back. But she died while she and her partner, Anne Walker, were in Kataisi, which is modern day Georgia, very, very long way from home. The group, I mean, I'm probably going to mention them multiple times during this podcast. The group In Search of Anne Walker have done some incredible research about the journey that Anne Walker took to get home, but also how she fought to get Anne Lister's body and her journals that were there back home to Halifax. And it is, I mean, that in of itself is a whole discussion, that entire journey back, because it took months and months and months. And she was a woman, traveling across Europe mostly by a good chunk of it by herself in 1840. But the journals, so after Anne Walker died, the journals were put into a cupboard in Shibden Hall, which was Anne Lister's home, put behind a panel, hidden away. And then a descendant of hers, John Lister, MA, who is, I want to say, a second cousin, he inherits the house. And he's very interested, he's an antiquarian, he's very interested in history and in local history of Halifax. So he starts transcribing all the journals, and his friend Arthur Burrell, who is another member of the Halifax Antiquarian Society, starts helping him. And I think this is really lovely, actually. The first word that they manage to crack is the word hope, which I think is delightful. But once they've cracked the cipher, they then start finding everything else that's in the journals. And up until that point, so for several years, John Lister, MA, had been publishing extracts of Lister's journals in the local newspaper saying oh, the life of a lady 50 years ago. Isn't this so interesting? We have this really detailed description of what's been happening in Halifax 50 years ago. So, I mean, we're so invested in Lister now, but even people in the sort of late 19th century were also really interested in her journals as well. Anyway, once they find out what's in the journals and the fact that she's having sex with a lot of women and very intimate relationships with women, Arthur Burrell initially says, you need to destroy these, you need to burn them. And thankfully for us, John Lister decides not to do that. He puts them back into the panelled cupboard in Shibden, and they stay there until after his death. Something to note is that Arthur Burrell did later say, I think to an archivist in Halifax, that he regretted suggesting that they be burnt, and that he was glad that they weren't burnt. So a bit of a positive there. Anyway, they go back into the walls, and then once he dies, he leaves Shibden Hall to the local council to be made into the land to be made into a public park. And so then you get Muriel Green, who is she was studying library studies. She goes through all of the papers that Lister left and that they find in these panelled walls, and she starts continuing this work. She gets the code as well and starts transcribing. She specifically focuses on Lister's letters. But yeah, thinking about that, we are very, very lucky to have Lister's archive at all, because there was that very serious risk of them being burned.
Oh, it's just such a fascinating story of the right people finding them at the right time, that they remain, because so many people's papers are gone. And like you said, when he was first publishing it, there's so much that's interesting about them. I mean, especially today, we're going to focus on like the queer history and stuff, but also just for anything to read a daily diary of somebody in this time period. It's fascinating. Just the minutia of it, I would imagine.
So much minutia.
It's like the reverse of last year. I did an episode about Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson wrote plethorous amounts of diaries, but they're all just like, here are the bank transactions I did today. It's not interesting to me personally, but this is like, she's like a true diary, like people's thought. Like I would imagine there's a combination of these are the bank transactions, but also with like, here's what's happening, here's what everybody's talking about. So if we're going to just kind of look at Anne Lister's life, in the context of her era, and she was a very singular person for the era. This is not a typical person living in England at this time. But her life, I would imagine, starts off like any sort of wealthy, right? They're a wealthy-ish, like they own property. So I imagine it's a wealthy family.
Yeah, sort of middling. I think one of the things that Lister talks about is that her father is really terrible with finances. So I think it kind of fluctuates over the course of her young adult life. And I think it is, I don't think I'm wrong in saying this. I mean, Kit, correct me if I'm wrong. One of the reasons that she is able to inherit Shibden is because she's able to persuade her uncle to leave it to her rather than her father, his brother, partly because of her capabilities financially.
I think that's right. Yeah. And I guess, I mean, we can talk about the ways in which her relationship with her money and her land makes her a problematic babe, but like she shows herself to be pretty adept with managing the estate, right?
I think all the interesting stuff really happens in her adult life, but like what was her childhood? What was her education? She was, I would imagine, educated quite well, just given where she was living and her family's cultural role.
Just some little schoolgirl romances, right? One of the places I take people when I give my walking tour of York's hidden queer history is King's Manor Girls' School, where she was. And there is some, there's no proof it's anything to do with Lister, but there is some lesbian graffiti on the window of King's Manor with a diamond. I cut this glass with these lips. I kissed a lass. It was a girls' school. That's girls who were kissing the lasses. So they were all at it. And Lister was no exception, right? I don't know if you want to tell some about Sarah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, she was taught a little bit in Halifax. I think it's in Halifax or Market Weighton. She's taught a little bit at home. Her two brothers get sent off to school. She goes to the manor school, and that's where she meets Eliza Rain, her first partner, who lived 1791 to 1860.
So how old is she when this relationship happened? Like she's a teenager. Is she more like 12 years old or is she more like 18 years old?
Yeah, she starts at King's Manor at the age of, I think, 14.
Yeah, because she starts the journals, certainly the journals that we have start when she's 15. The point that we have with the journals is that she's already left King's Manor.
Right.
So this is before 15. Okay.
Yeah, so the first line in the journal says, it reads, Eliza left us. And it's because she is already home and Eliza has been to visit during a break from school and has come to stay with them in Halifax and then has gone back to school or to York, I don't remember which. But by that point, Lister had left the school.
So when we're talking about her in terms of like relationships, like the first one we know of, she's probably 13, 14 or something like that.
Yeah, she starts the school when she's 14. She shares a room with Eliza. So yeah, she's like 14, 15. When she
they're sharing a room.
Yeah.
Convenient.
Yeah, they have a little attic room to themselves.
And what do we know about this relationship?
That doesn't end well for Eliza, right?
Not the best. Yeah, I mean they're together for a little while. This was one of the things that I studied as part of my doctoral research. Was they take a trip in 1809.
So Anne is 18.
Yeah, 18. They've both left school by that point, and Anne has persuaded her mother, Rebecca, to take her to Scarborough because of her ill health. And just by chance, and this is my reading of it, just by chance, they have to go and pick Eliza up and take her with them. So they go from, yeah, exactly. They go from Halifax up to York, pick Eliza up en route. They also drop in and see, before she goes and sees Eliza, they go and drop in on her former teachers from the King's Manor. So another sort of idea that gets floated a little bit in Lister studies is this idea that Lister was kicked out of school because of homosexuality and her relationship with Eliza. I haven't found anything to really concretely prove that. And I know that some of the Lister scholars more recently have said that they've gone through everything that we have, and there's no concrete evidence that Lister was kicked out. And actually the fact that I know that there's this conversation between Lister and her former tutors that is very friendly, it doesn't seem like there was really any animosity that indicates that she was kicked out. Anyway, they then go from York onto Scarborough. The only downside is we don't have either of their records of what they did in Scarborough, because Eliza didn't keep any record whilst they were there. She just jumps from the day that she left York to the day that she goes back.
Can I ask a question as a North American person? Is there anything to do in Scarborough? What kind of place is it? Is it like a beachside town?
This is the seaside.
Yes.
This is a spa town.
Yeah, it's a spa town.
Okay,
Yeah,
it's a place that people go often. It's just
health.
like, okay.
Yes, and it's very much a health
Take the
tourism
waters.
route. Yeah, take the waters, to bathe in the waters. And that might not necessarily mean like getting in the sea. For some people it did, particularly for men, it would mean going directly in the sea. Sometimes it would mean taking baths, different specific locations in the town. So you'd go and see specialists and, drink the waters, imbibe them, but also bathe in them, depending on what your malady was, really.
So this is who was ill at this point that they needed to go to this town?
So Lister has managed to persuade her friend, Dr. Alexander, that he needs to persuade her mother, Rebecca Lister, to take her to Scarborough. And around this time, there are a couple of instances of Lister sort of having like a couple of fainting fits, like not feeling very well. But also, this is also around the time that she starts going out drinking with her friends, and sort of staying out partying in Halifax, essentially, or sort of the early 19th century equivalent of that. So I take it with a bit of a pinch of salt that she might well have been sick, but I think there's also a good motivation for her to also have this opportunity to go on holiday with her partner, with her girlfriend.
This reminds me of, I'm just trying to contextualize this for myself, but in some places, actually, I don't know what the situation is, just England, but in the United States where like cannabis is legal, but only with a doctor's prescription. So people get various like, oh, I have whatever, the various health conditions that you go to your doctor to be like, oh, I have anxiety. And the doctor's like, great, here's your cannabis prescription. Like it's the sort of thing where you have to kind of like have a doctor sign off on it, but they don't like give you a full exam. So for the doctor to say, Anne Lister needs to go to Scarborough, it's not like,
is this more like Anne just really wants to go on holiday with Eliza, but her mum won't take her unless the doctor says this is a really good idea? You should do that.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's the reading that I have of the situation.
And so much of what we know about her is from her own diary. Do we know how this relationship was being understood by other people at the time? I'm just curious to know these like teenage lesbians, like in a time when there was very strong female friendship. Like, how did people see them as just like another example of like very strong female friends, or did people see what was going on? Or do you know?
I'm not so sure about with Eliza and Lister. I mean, we do have bits of Eliza's journal from this period, and we also have correspondence between them. We also have correspondence between Eliza and Lister's mother, and the way that, so like one of the ways that I know that Eliza went on that trip is because of a letter that she sends to Rebecca Lister where she says, yes, I will come along with you. I'm very happy to go along with you. And the way that she describes her relationship with Lister to Lister's mum is really, I mean, if we're looking at Eliza's writing style, she can be quite flamboyant. She can be quite dramatic at times. And the way that she talks about her connection with Lister is quite, I think probably from her mum's perspective, it might be considered a bit more than just friendship.
Mm-hmm. So they go on this trip to Scarborough.
Yes.
And then how does this, well, you said the relationship doesn't end well for Eliza. What happens between these two?
So a couple of years later, so they've not seen each other as much over the last couple of years because Lister's not in York anymore. She's sort of traveling around a little bit. Eliza's traveling around as well. And we don't know exactly when Lister met Mariana Lawton, Mariana Belcombe at that point, but she becomes friends with Isabella Norcliffe, or Tib, as she's known in the TV show. Eliza introduces Lister to Tib. And then Tib introduces Lister to Mariana Belcom. And it's at this point that Eliza starts to feel pushed out, and she doesn't feel like they're in as close a relationship anymore. She's used the term, so she calls Lister Welly in their letters. So that's her nickname for her. A lot of Lister's partners have nicknames for her, but that is around the time that their relationship, I think it had already been becoming a bit more distant around that point anyway, but that is really where you get the, like, a bit of jealousy and that just breaking off. And then she's going and pursuing Tib, and she's going and pursuing Mariana Lawton at that point.
Actually, I have a question, because I think I came across this a bit when I was reading up. What was Anne Lister's type? It's like kind of conventionally feminine women. Is that correct?
I'd say so. There's a couple of things where some of the ways that she describes the women that she likes is we'd consider it quite misogynistic now. I think she did like women that challenged her, but not too much. So she liked women that were intelligent, but not more intelligent than her. Like, she liked to feel that she was impressing them with her knowledge. But yeah, I think that's kind of consistent.
It's a bit of a mansplainer, I guess.
A little bit, yeah. But then, and there are instances, I think, where Eliza in her letters to Lister is saying, like, oh, please explain this to me. So it is that them sort of being, like, quite enamored by her intelligence and wanting to learn from her. And I think she just really likes being able to teach people.
Can we talk about, and maybe this is a question for you, Kit, as well, is Anne Lister's physical presentation, how she would dress, how she did her hair, and how that she wasn't blending in, basically, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of the aspects of Anne's, what I call kind of ambivalence about gender. So she becomes known for dressing kind of mostly in black, which is very much how men dress, not how women dress, in a more masculine style, and not conforming to norms of femininity of that period. And I think that in the kind of 18th, early 19th century paradigm of sexuality that, like, she's understanding herself in, that is a part of her attraction to women, is being more masculine. That's kind of what it means to be attracted to femme women, is that she presents and understands herself in a more masculine way. I don't know if you want to add anything, Sarah. I
know there's a bit where, and again, I'm going back to Scarborough. There's a little instance where she's it's a couple of days before she and her mother set off to go to York, and she decides to go and get a new pair of shoes for this holiday. And I forgot what they're called, but she tries to get these sort of military style half shoes, like half boots. And I think of that as being quite compelling, because it is almost like this in between a boot and a shoe, which the boots being a very masculine shoe, and then slippers being a much more feminine shoe that women were wearing. It's a lot harder to walk around in a slipper because they'd usually be made of things like silk. But I think it's interesting that, when she's on her way to Scarborough, she contemplates buying these shoes that are in of themselves, and the way that they're structured, kind of playing with gender a little bit.
That's so perfect. That's so perfect that she's just like, I'm not a slipper, I'm not a boot, I'm kind of this other third.
Yeah. But then she does start wearing boots later on. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, apart from anything else, she walks really long distances, right? Like, you need a boot. But
just practically, yeah. Well, and this is where I really want to just to really understand, in the context of this society she's living in, do you think it's because she is, I don't know. I know that the class system is like I don't fully understand it, but I know it's very part of British society and has always been. Is she an upper class person, or is she like a middle class person?
She's landed gentry, so I'd say sort of somewhere between middle class and upper class.
She's upper middle class, yeah. Which I don't know if that even makes sense to a North American audience. But it's the point you're making, Anne, that, like, class privilege is partly what allows her to get away with this.
That's what I was leading to. Is she able to express herself in this way because she has some societal advantages in a way that someone lower class than her maybe wouldn't have been able to? Like, the fact that she's able to do this and get away with it, and no one's like, she's not being ostracized, clearly. Or is she?
Well,
she is.
Okay.
And there's instances where she gets, even by partners, she gets quite horribly, I think it's quite horrible, quite horribly rejected for her presentation. And there's a bit again, we're back in Scarborough. It's a different Scarborough trip. It's later in her life. It's in the 1820s.
She just likes to go to Scarborough. You know?
I know. She only went there a couple of times, but I'm just focusing on it. She goes back to Scarborough with Marina, now Lawton. So she's married to Charles Lawton at this point. And she just kind of rejects Anne because of her unfashionable dress and the fact that she's starting to get, because I think she's in her sort of like late 20s, early 30s at this point. She's starting to get like facial hair a little bit on her chin and like her whiskers. And Mariana just kind of treats her like, oh, I don't want to be seen with you in public. And Anne is really deeply hurt by it.
So she's becoming more, I don't know if it's necessarily masculine presenting, but just more like she's wearing black. And then eventually it's like now she's wearing boots. And now it's like she's got whiskers. Like she's becoming more, I don't know, she's standing out more as she gets older. Somehow, is that true?
I think it fluctuates because I think there's also a point where she starts to femme it up a little bit. And I'm no fashion historian, but I know that there's a point where she does start to femme it up a little bit more. And that's just so that she'll be treated a bit more nicely. And also when we get into like the late 1820s, early 1830s, when she's really starting to try and get in with these different members of the aristocracy, they do see her as a bit of an oddity and a bit unique. But there's that sort of fine line between like, oh, isn't this funny? Isn't she queer? Isn't she a bit funny? But also having to conform to their gender expectations. And there's only so far that you can go with that before you'll be ostracized completely.
So I'm just thinking, so we're talking about how she actually, can we pivot from, we're going to get back into her relationships, obviously, but the whole like landowner thing. So you're saying that she, in order to be sort of accepted in certain echelons, she was kind of like becoming a bit more femme a little bit. But at what point does she inherit the property and become a landowner?
1826.
So that would make her in her 30s, early 30s.
Yeah.
And it's the property where the diaries are found, Shibden Hall?
Yeah, Shibden Hall. Yeah, it's just outside of Halifax in Yorkshire.
Yeah, so it's quite a substantial manor house, parkland, and she owns various bits of land along with that, which she can exploit for mining purposes, right?
Yeah.
Actually, okay, we're going to talk about the landowning, and we're going to talk about the problematic faveness of what does she do with this property and money, and how is she getting her income?
So she inherited tenants from her uncle. So there were already people who were renting properties owned by the Listers on Shibden's land and also sort of around Halifax. So she takes on those tenancies when he dies. She also, just starts getting involved in different enterprises in Halifax. So she, and this is, I think, quite a major plot point in the TV show, is that she learns that her neighbours, the Rawsons, who she knew when she was younger, she was quite close with different members of the Rawsons, particularly the women at different points in her younger life. Not that I remember. I don't think there's any intimacies between her and the Rawsons, except maybe flirtation. But at this later point, she learns that the men in the Rawson family are exploiting her coal beds. And so she's given this advice to...
What? Oh, her coal, like her mines? Okay.
Yeah, so they're not being mined actively, but they're coal beds that I think previously had been mined, like a slightly earlier generation of the Lister family, but not in her lifetime, I don't believe. But it suggested that she start having people mine her coal so that they can keep it, so that she can actually get some money out of it, and also so that they're not continuing to be exploited by their neighbours. And so she really goes quite all in on this. Yeah, and that's sort of, late 1820s, early 1830s that starts to happen.
And she's a quite early investor in railway shares as well, isn't she?
Yes.
Because the railways are getting going in Britain around this time, 1825. You get the first passenger railway, and Yorkshire is one of the first places where they start building up. So that's another big source of income.
If this was like a cis man we were talking about, this would just be like very par for the course expected behavior of somebody who inherited this property and now they're overseeing the mines, they're getting shares in railways. Like, this is kind of typical behavior for a landowner, would you say?
I think so, yeah.
Which just becomes exceptional because of who she is and that it's not a cis man doing this.
Yeah. I mean, there were other women who were taking on property after family members had died. I think the thing that is seen as exceptional about Lister is just how much she is involved, and the fact that she's not delegating to other people. It's the fact that she is very actively getting herself involved in the business of it all. And she's overseeing, and and not that she's just overseeing it, but the fact that she's really invested and she's very interested in her own business as well.
To me, that I can see that would pair up with her trait that you talked about before of liking to explain things to people and stuff. Like she's clearly somebody who thinks a lot of her own abilities. So I could see that if she's involved, she thinks, well, I need to have my fingers in everything because I'm the smart one here. I'm the one who knows what to do. And I don't mean this in a negative way at all. I'm just trying to form a picture of what she's like as a person. And it's like, of course, like in her personal life and also in this business life, she would want to be kind of in charge of things. That just seems to be what she's about. Yeah,
absolutely. And after she leaves the King's Manor, she is very invested in continuing her education. And she does this through, I know that there's a trend at the moment for people making their own curriculums at home for sort of like the autumn semester if they're out of academia. But she creates her own curriculum for herself. She has local tutors come and tutor her on a variety of different topics. She goes to lectures that are held in Halifax. And I think when we're thinking about exceptionality, there were other women that were doing this. There were other women that were attending these lectures and learning about these things. And I think a really great example of a peer of Lister's that, in a more general sense, that we can think of as having similar traits to her, is her friend Frances Pickford, who lived in Bath and in the Bristol area, that she identified with, but also would often kind of try and distance herself from because of their similarities, and particularly because of Frances Pickford's more overt masculinity than Lister's own. Yeah. And the fact that she also was living with a partner at different points in her life.
Oh, interesting. So in terms of so she's getting all this education. At what point does she start doing all this kind of world traveling? Well, is this before or after Anne Walker? I guess it's before, right? Before. She does quite a bit. Yeah.
Way before. She goes to Paris for the first time with her father and with her sister in the early 1820s. They go just the three of them. And then she goes over again another 2 times to Paris with her aunt, and she lives there for quite a while. And that's, if we're looking at like Helena Whitbread's editions of Lister's journals. So she was one of the first she was the first person to publish Lister's journals, including the lesbian content in her journals and the sexual content in her journals. Helena Whitbread was doing that in the late 1980s. Her second book, No Priest But Love, is about Lister's life when she's living in Paris. At that point, she's living with her Aunt Anne, and then at other times she's living separately, and sometimes with another woman called Maria Barlow and her daughter.
And is that another romantic interest, Maria Barlow?
Oh, yeah. If we think about, I don't want to try and frame it too much around Gentleman Jack or the TV film, but I know that it's a good shortcut for people and a media touchstone. Maria Barlow, we only see for like maybe 3 seconds in one of the first episodes of the show, and it's just performing oral sex on her and her orgasming, and then it cuts away, and that's all we ever see of Maria Barlow. So, all right, I'm assuming that it's Maria Barlow because it's meant to be that she's in Paris and she's having sex with this woman. I'm like, it's probably Maria Barlow.
So in terms of her, I don't know how much this is like it doesn't seem like there's a clear delineation of this relationship ends and then this one begins. There's always sort of an overlap period. But we had Eliza Rain, and then then she left her for Mariana, right?
I mean, it depends if we're including everyone.
Okay. So there's lots. There's lots of paramours, there's lots of relationships, and they're all detailed in this diary. Yeah. And I don't know if Mariana is a good example, or who would be a good example of what these relationships were like. Like if you were in a relationship with Anne Lister, what are you up to? Are you going for walks together? Are you just secretly meeting by night? Like what is the relationship?
I mean, I think each of her relationships is quite different. And it's just because they're just very she's at different points in her life. I think what we think of as like the core relationships and the ones that she is like actively pursuing them in a romantic way as well as a sexual way. A lot of them were conducted long distance, like very lesbian stereotype. So, I mean, her first relationship with Eliza Reign, they start at school, and then they're sort of, a lot of their relationship is conducted via correspondence. And then the same happens a little bit with Isabella Norcliffe, but they're seeing each other relatively often, and they're corresponding a lot. And Mariana, again, it's kind of, there's a fluctuation between them sort of having these instances where they're meeting up. And I think, again, my research is about Lister's travel motivations and her mobility around the UK. And a lot of that, I think, is motivated by, she does a lot of her travel to go and see the women that she's interested in. And she's motivated to go to those places so that she gets the chance to meet up with them. Even if, I mean, there are so many instances of Mariana's traveling somewhere else, and Anne will meet her at a stop in the middle, and they'll have a little tryst, and then Mariana will carry on to go do something with her husband.
Oh, so sorry. Mariana has a husband?
Oh, yeah. So she marries in 1816. March 1816. And I think it's pertinent that, so Lister's journal, for the most part, is very, very consistent. So from 1806, we have the loose leaf journals. I call them the pre-journals. I know that other Lister scholars call them her juvenilia, which I think is pretty accurate. They go from 1806 to 1814. We then have a big old gap between 1814 and August 1816. And then from there on, we get most of her life until that last missing month when she's in Kataisi at the end. And there is a fair amount of evidence, I know Jill Liddington's written about this, that basically Lister probably, there's a high chance that Lister burnt or destroyed that bit of the journal when she's in her most committed part of her relationship with Mariana. So a lot of their, when they're actually sort of together before Mariana is married, we just have the remaining correspondence. We don't actually have the journal entries for that period.
Do we know? I'm just a nosy gossip. What does her husband think of all of this? Does he know about all of this?
He definitely does, because he finds a letter from Anne basically saying, like, she's saying to Mariana, like, just wait till Charles dies and then we'll be together. Like, I'm paraphrasing there, but she's basically saying, let's just wait till Charles dies and then we'll be happy. And he sees that letter, and it impacts the way that, I think there's a period where Anne's letters don't get through to Mariana, or Mariana's letters don't get back to Anne. So there's a bit where they're not corresponding very much. And that's because of the husband's sort of repression of that communication. There are, again, and I think this is something that I'll always say about Lister, is that she's very contradictory over the course of her life. And I think it is such a gift that we have so much of her life recorded. So you can see where she changes her mind, where her ideas evolve. So she's not, I don't think we can really talk about Lister in a super consistent way, or say she was X or she was this, because she changes so much. And I've forgotten the point that I was going to make. I'm really sorry.
Well, no, I just had another question, and maybe this is for Kit, just in terms of, so if the husband finding this letter, and I mean, I guess if anyone saw a letter being like, once your husband is dead, we'll be together, you'd be like, oh, okay, like, what's happening? But in terms of like an understanding of lesbian relationships in the early 1800s, because I know there's like sodomy laws and stuff, but that's very much based on men, right? Like there's not... Is this the time period where there's not really a law against being a lesbian? Because people are like, well, if there's no penis, then it's not sex, so who cares? Is that this era?
Kinda, yeah. And I mean, the laws are, but yeah, partly about what counts as sex, but partly also, I suppose, about what are the consequences of relationships. You know, the buggery law has always, in England, and I think everywhere, partly been about the social consequences that can result from two men having an intimate relationship. Because if someone has, you know, men are people who can have political power, and therefore, if someone can inveigle their way into their intimacy sexually, that influences the way they dispense that political power. Whereas women, the assumption is they don't have political or financial influence, therefore it's of less consequence what they're getting up to sexually or romantically. And Lister is obviously an outlier in having some economic and political power, but I don't think that's really Charles Laughton's objection, that like that's going to affect the way that she deploys that. There is enough erotica out at this time that means that like people can have a pretty good idea of what women could do sexually. It's very skewed towards penetrative sex still, but I think the idea that two women could have a sexually satisfying relationship is something that would have been available to Charles, and therefore is making him angry when he realizes that is what his wife is getting from Anne. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, I think it's very much an issue of cuckoldry, really, that he feels like he's being made a cuckold of, despite the fact that he himself was also having extramarital affairs.
Of course, naturally.
And siring and like having children with other women. I think he has a son with a servant, something like that. But obviously he's held to a different standard than Mariana is, that Lister is.
This just like on the same topic. It's just, my previous season of this podcast, we were talking about Marie Antoinette, and there was so much, various people, lots of pamphlets, demonizing her in various ways. And one of them was saying like, she's a lesbian, and that is dangerous and unnatural and German. So at that period of time, and there's these like very detailed erotic pamphlets talking about how Marie Antoinette is having these relationships with her female favorites. And so lesbianism was understood as being a threat to kind of society. Was that the case in England at this time as well, or do you know?
In that it is a disruption to patriarchal social reproduction. Yeah, absolutely. If the women are having sex for fun rather than for babies, if the women are being distracted from what is considered to be their natural place in society, then yes, absolutely. Yeah, I don't know if, Sarah, you have some more specific stuff to say about Anne Lister.
I was going to say, she references Marie Antoinette quite specifically. So again, returning to the idea of terminology, like what language do we use to describe Lister? Can we call her a lesbian? So she did have the word sapphic or sapphist. And she, I don't remember what year it is, but there's an instance where Maria Barlow is asking her about it. So this is when they're living in Paris. And she said, and so they have this conversation about sapphic love or desire. And Lister says, oh no, I'm not sapphic. And she says that it's because she associates it with artifice and specifically with penetration. And this idea of like lesbian sex for the pleasure of men. So she talks about it in sort of that framing. But yeah, so she rejects the term sapphic because of this connotation with Marie Antoinette.
I mean, you brought it up, so I'm just going to follow what you just said, because Anne Lister's diaries are very specific. Can you talk about what sex acts she was getting up to? Because there was not penetration, right? Or there was not toys or... You tell me. You've done so much more research. Yeah.
I don't think that there's... This is me working my brain now. I don't think there's ever... Yeah, I don't think she uses toys, but she does have very specific language and different terminology that she uses to describe different sex acts. So she says, I think the most common one is having a kiss, and she's not talking about a kiss on the mouth. I think having a kiss is rubbing on the sort of externally on the vulva, and sort of and causing frictions like frottage on the outside of the vulva. And then she also describes grubbling, which is then kind of going a bit deeper. And then she also, I mean, we can come to the blanket at some point from earlier. At this point, there's a bit where she describes fingering a partner and feeling the stones of, I think it's the stones of Urania or Anania or something, but she's also putting her fingers up into her partner and penetrating them that way.
You mentioned the blanket, and before we were recording, Sarah was showing us. You have actually, you know what? We have this video show. Like you have 3 Anne Lister based objects in your vicinity. Yeah. So can you show the blanket? Will be the finale. But okay. So you've got a mug, you've got a shirt. Yeah.
So to start with, the jumper that I'm wearing says a little bit of chaos, and that's in Anne Lister's handwriting. I also have, and this is in her crypt hand, so it's completely illegible. It starts here and it says, and this is a direct quote from Lister, it says, "I am the best doctor." And I was given this after I finished my PhD. But then also, before my partner and I got together, when we were flirting with each other, she was very kind and made me this delightful blanket. And on it, it's all in crypt hand. And it's all a page from Lister's journal where she's being intimate and grubbling and putting her fingers inside a Miss Mary Valence, And so, yeah, it's just a whole, it's a whole fleece blanket just with smut from Lister's journal on a page.
Mm-hmm. It's delightful.
This is the best meet cute I've ever heard, by the way. Like flirting with someone with Lister smut.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. And also a good example for the listeners to show this is what the crypt hand looks like. This is what people are deciphering. Like, to me, it's just, I would have no idea. Like, it just looks like random symbols. But to people who, once you crack the code. And now for a quick advertising break. You may have heard of HelloFresh. You may have even heard me talking about them before because I love a food box delivery. I'm a person who lives by myself, and maybe you live with other people. I'm sure it's great for you too, but what I can say for myself is the cost of groceries right now is kind of bananas. And if I want to cook a recipe for myself, it's like I don't want to buy a whole container of this spice and that spice and like a whole cauliflower or whatever. It's like I just need the amounts of the ingredients I need to make a meal for one. That is me. And you can get that with HelloFresh. Well, technically the meals are for two, so that's like a meal and a lunch the next day. They are the #1 meal kit in America, making home cooking easier with chef-crafted recipes and fresh ingredients delivered straight to your door. This fall, they're serving up even more to love. This isn't the HelloFresh you remember, if you remember them from before. It is bigger. They've doubled their menu. There's more than 100 options each week if you're a picky eater like myself, including new seasonal dishes and recipes from around the world, international recipes, if you will. Healthier options. There's high protein recipes. I know we're all trying to up our protein goals. It's challenging, right? But also, as I know, and maybe you do too, if you're eating more protein, you need more fiber, which is why they also help you. You can eat greener with veggie-packed recipes with 2 or more veggies per dish. The recipes are, guess what, also tastier. So, as I said before, I love a food box delivery. HelloFresh is doing the thing. It's honestly saving me, helping me. I don't live near a grocery store either. That helps me out as well. It's a great product. I eat these meals myself, and you should too. The best way to cook just got better. Go to hellofresh.com/vulgarhistory10fm now to get 10 free meals and a free breakfast for life. 1 per box with active subscription. Free meals applied as discount on first box. New subscribers only. Varies by plan. That's hellofresh.com/vulgarhistory10fm, and that's 10fm, to get 10 free meals and free breakfast for life.
The holidays are approaching, and everyone knows that this time of year, the sooner you can get things done, the better. For both shoppers and businesses, the best time to score great deals during the holidays is during that Black Friday, Cyber Monday weekend. And if you have your own business, whether you've been around the block a few times or this is your first year going through the holiday sale rush, the most important thing you can have is a platform that can handle everything that's about to be thrown at you. This is a crucial time for your business and your customers. And with Shopify, you can be sure that your tools and platform are ready for anything that comes your way. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the US. From household names to entrepreneurs who will be participating in their first Black Friday, Cyber Monday this year. With everything else going on, you probably don't have time to spend hours poring over every little detail in your online store. That's why Shopify's thousands of templates and tools help you streamline website creation and make sure that your site isn't just aesthetically pleasing, but functional and easy to use. Shopify's expedited checkout, Shop Pay, saves customer information and reduces hassle. And the best part is that it's been proven to boost conversions, meaning you'll see less abandoned carts and more profits. You can also stress less knowing that Shopify's award-winning customer support team is on standby 24/7 to help with any issues that arise, allowing you to get back to your business as fast as possible. This Black Friday, join the thousands of new entrepreneurs hearing for the first time with Shopify. Sign up for your free trial today at shopify.com/realm. That's shopify.com/realm. Go to shopify.com/realm and make this Black Friday one to remember.
This episode is brought to you by Netflix. This Monday night, witness the end of an era. John Cena takes center stage for his final appearance ever on Monday Night Raw. One last match, one unforgettable farewell. Come celebrate the legacy of a true WWE legend. Monday Night Raw, November 17th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific Time, only on Netflix. Be there for the moment everyone will be talking about.
Once upon a mundane morning, Barb's day got busy without warning. A realtor in need of an open house sign. No, 50 of them, and designed before 9.
My head hurts.
Any mighty tools to help with this plight?
Aha!
Barb made her move. She opened Canva and got in the groove.
Bulk creating Canva sheets. Create 50 signs fit for suburban streets.
Done in a click, all complete.
Sweet!
Now, imagine what your dreams can become when you put imagination to work at canva.com.
And we're back.
Yeah.
So she's having these sexual relationships. She's being a landowner. She's got these coal mines. I don't know if this, again, you both know this story much better than I do, but if this could lead to her ideas about marriage, because to be sort of like a landowning man, usually, if you're a cis man, you would marry some heiress or something, right? Like to combine your fortunes, to get a bit more money. What were her thoughts about marriage? Like at this point, legally, if she was going to get married, it would have to be to a man. And I don't sense that was ever an option that she considered.
Yeah, I don't think marriage to a man was ever on the cards. I think this is where another place where Anne Lister as problematic favourably comes to the fore. She considered a kind of religious quasi-marriage ceremony with Mariana, to my knowledge. They considered going to church and kind of sharing Holy Communion together as a marriage ceremony. And then that was something she actually did with Anne Walker. And there are romantic and financial motivations for this, I think it's probably fair to say. It is something that's really important to her. You know, she writes in her diary that the first time she ever held Anne Walker, she hoped that they would be together forever. I'm paraphrasing. So, you know, there are romantic motivations, but it is undeniable that Anne Walker also had a lot of money. And I don't know whether, Sarah, you want to contextualize or talk a bit more about that.
I mean, coming back to Mariana for a second, so they did exchange rings, and there are multiple partners that Lister has who describe her as their husband. Eliza, right at the start, describes Lister as her husband. Mariana describes her as her husband, and I think Anne does at some point I think she says it to Lister and then she writes it in the journal. I don't think she never describes Lister as her husband in her journal personally, but there is that sentiment between them. Yeah, she took those relationships quite seriously, but as we said, there's also consistently, she's also having relationships with other women whilst she's in these relationships. And I think that was because she wasn't constrained by religious or legal marriage. She was able to sort of look outside of the relationship because she wasn't constrained in the same way.
Although I will say, like with the example of Mariana's husband, men weren't either. Like, so
Exactly.
Anne Lister in that way was, you have your primary relationship and then you have your other mistresses. And so maybe just emulating how men would. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. She really is emulating that differentiation between wives and mistresses. And Maria Barlow definitely describes herself as being like a mistress to Lister. And that being their relationship because she's aware of Mariana and I don't know whether she's fully aware of the extent of their relationship, but she feels like a mistress. And I think the same, again, I could be wrong here, but I think the same is equivalent with Mary Valence as well in the 1820s. The relationship with Anne Walker is probably the bit of her journals that I know the least. So my engagement is more like early journals, 1820s. I will say, like, from what I've read quite a lot of the different texts that go over that part of her life, the late 1820s and 1830s and her relationship with Anne Walker, there is still a lot of love there. And I think there have been some texts that have come out, some literature that's come out that kind of de-emphasizes the love and affection between them, and the fact that there was. I know that some people have said, like, oh, it wasn't the same kind of love as what she had with Mariana. And I know that you asked at the beginning about my work with fandom and the Lister fan community and enthusiast community. I think that's something that doesn't just come through with the enthusiast community, but does also come through with Lister researchers, is that we all have our favorite partner of Lister's, as the way that we understand our relationship with her, I think can be a little bit I don't think bias is the right word, but I think it can be our position and our interpretation of those relationships might change if there's a different relationship that we are prioritizing in our research.
Well, and so Anne Walker is the person, and this is where I really want to get Kit's point of view on this, because there is some sort of church ceremony that has been commemorated with a plaque. Can you explain your work with that, but also what your understanding of what this church ceremony was?
Yeah, I think in context of the meaning that it had to Anne and the romantic nature of their relationship, I think it's fair to call it a marriage in context. They exchange rings and they stay behind after the church service to share Holy Communion together, which is what they would have done if they were like having a church wedding. And it's contextualized in Anne Lister's diaries as something that is about them being together forever. It's not monogamy, as Sarah said, but it is romantic. And I think, it's a great point you make, Sarah, that there's a very kind of ideologically romantic narrative that says like, oh, Anne Lister's first love was her greatest love. And so like she couldn't have Mariana, so Anne Walker was a consolation prize. And I don't think on the basis of what we know about their relationship that that's a fair spin to put on it. It makes a good TV narrative, maybe, but it doesn't reflect like the messiness of people's lives. Like people can fall in love with more than one person. And I think it's really clear that Anne Lister did.
And so the plaque, the drama of the plaque, and also the meaning of the plaque to people. I just remember from your book, Kit, you talked about you were involved in the wording of it or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. Let's give it a bit of context on this. So the background is that the church where Anne and Dan had their what you could call a marriage is Holy Trinity Gudrumgate in York. It's this lovely little tucked away church off one of York's lovely little narrow streets in the Minster Quarter. And when I lived in York, I was involved in the charity York LGBT History Month, and with a friend and academic, Helen Graham, we started a DIY rainbow plaques project where people would make cardboard plaques to commemorate like places that they thought were significant to queer history in York. And one of the places that came up, we ran this over several years, and one of the places that came up year after year was people really wanted to commemorate this place where Anne and Dan had what could be counted as York's first lesbian marriage. And that meant that when the possibility was raised of having a permanent rainbow plaque in York, that was the place that people were really, really keen to focus on. Now, the process by which we worked on this plaque, there were various organizations involved. Helen Graham, as an academic with an interest in heritage, was involved kind of independently. I was involved from York LGBT History Month. There was also the Church's Conservation Trust, who owns Holy Trinity, and there was York LGBT Forum, which is a kind of big peer support and advocacy queer group in the city. And so we all worked together, and we all had kind of our own little agendas for how we wanted to do it. For the Church's Conservation Trust, they wanted to bring tourism in. For the York Civic Trust, who were organising the plaque, had slightly different priorities. The LGBT Forum had different priorities again. But what none of us really had was a great link to specifically lesbian organizations in the city, or I think a sense of the national and international significance of the plaque that we were trying to put up. So we held consultations, and we held consultation events and online surveys, but we didn't really reach all of the right people. And in part, that was because of the specific context in York, where actually most of the queer organizations that were involved in the plaque committee were trans-led. And most of the lesbian organizations, even though their members weren't necessarily transphobic, they were like transphobic lesbian led. So like we weren't getting our message through because of the specific people involved. And there was also one of the organizations who was keen to do it on like a specific deadline that I think, wasn't the right decision in the end. It meant that the process was rushed. And so we ended up getting the impression from the consultation we did that what was most important to people was pointing out Anne Lister's gender nonconformity, and pointing out that it was a marriage, although the church was then like, you can't say marriage. So we ended up with this unwieldy phrase, celebrated marital commitment without legal recognition. And people were really keen on like Anne Lister as a kind of women in business icon, like Anne Lister girl boss. So we ended up with this mishmash of all those things. And this And we unveiled the plaque at really, I think, like the very beginning of the kind of transculture wars that we have today. This was 2017, I think. It was a surprise to all of us, I think, that our description of Anne Lister's behaviour as gender nonconforming was taken as claiming Anne Lister for the trans side and not the lesbian side. I think it was naive of us to not see that coming. And I think it was naive of us to not see Anne Lister as a lesbian figure from lesbian history was really important to lesbians. But I also think that the way that the plaque was read and spun was a product of the very beginnings of that transphobic culture war in the UK. And what if this was happening to me now, I would, I think, be able to try and negotiate what happened afterwards in a way that meant that the plaque we ended up with, the reworded plaque we ended up with, spoke to Anne's lesbian history and trans history. But the position I was in, it was the first time I'd really had like a substantial amount of transphobic online hate, and I was so completely blindsided by that I wasn't really able to take like an active part in the discussions for the reworded plaque that happened afterwards. And despite a few people trying to get me to, I really wasn't in a place where I could do that. And so the plaque we have now calls Anne a lesbian, which is also a term I didn't use. It doesn't say anything about gender nonconformity, and did rephrase the stuff about marriage in a way that I think works better. And now says took sacrament to seal her union, and goes with diarist instead of entrepreneur girl boss. And there are pros and cons to all of those decisions, but I do think that the replacement of gender nonconforming with lesbian is still not something that reflects Anne's totality perfectly. Instead, what we have is a plaque that sort of continues to reflect the wrangling over Anne's legacy and the desire for different groups to see themselves in her, and rather than a plaque that reflects Anne fully, I would say.
It's such a complex thing to try and take somebody's totality into a plaque that I'm sure has a certain letter count or a word count, and how you also So in terms of the plaque itself, like it is, you described it as the rainbow plaque. So it's similar to the blue plaques that are all over the UK, right? That just like this person lived in this house, this person, whatever. So it's like that, but it's got the rainbow. So it'll make it easy for people to find the church who want to make a pilgrimage. I guess they'll notice it.
Yeah, well, you still have to go through the gateway to see it. So it's not.
Oh, okay.
It's not.
So it's not even that.
But it was the UK's first rainbow plaque, which is now, a thing that there are more of across the UK. So that remains something I'm proud of. It's a blue plaque, but it's visibly queer history. You can't ignore the fact that a queer person was here and is being given the same validation as other kinds of heritage. And I do think that's really important.
And from your work, Sarah, what have you found about the importance of people visiting this site in terms of Anne Lister fans and tourism and things? I would imagine this is like site number one if someone's doing an Anne Lister pilgrimage.
Yeah, it's like either site number one or site number two after Shibden Hall. I mean, this was like the topic of my PhD thesis it was partly, where's Anne going? Like, what's Anne interested in? And then the other part was, what are Lister enthusiasts interested in? Like, where are they going? What locations are important to them, like in relation to Anne, but also where else are they going because of Anne? But yeah, like this is probably, I would say, the majority of people that I spoke to, because I did 40 interviews as part of my work, pretty much everyone had been, like, I think everyone had been to Shibden Hall at least once. And I think probably about 75 to 80% had been to Holy Trinity as well. So that was a really, really key point. And it was the first, I think it was, they're just so, both of them are just such important places because it is, I don't know, if we think about it in terms of sort of, in a more sort of homonormative continuum, we sort of have Shibden Hall as the place that she lived, Halifax Minster in Halifax, where she was christened, and where somewhere in Halifax Minster she's buried. But then we also have the place where she took vows and was married, which is Holy Trinity Church. So those are sort of three really, really key places. And then I was interested in like, okay, well, where else are people interested in going? Why are they going there? What about those other locations? Are they being drawn to those places because of Lister?
Can we talk, well, I mean, in terms of other places, when she and Anne Walker were married, they traveled together to various places. Both, I don't know. I keep saying things and I'm like, well, you tell me. But I know for sure that like she died in Georgia. So they're obviously in like continental Europe. But what other places did you come across in your research that people like to visit? Were those places that Anne traveled to?
I mean, in my work, I was mostly, I'd love to do another project looking at people's travels on mainland Europe. I was mostly looking at their travels within Britain, because a lot of enthusiasts who were traveling to go to listed locations, some of them were Brits themselves, but a lot were coming from around the globe. So they would generally, as their first port of call, they would go to England first, and they would go to Shibden, they would go to Holy Trinity, they would go to Halifax Minster. But in terms of her continental travel, oh my gosh, like pretty much like almost everywhere, not everywhere, but a lot of different nations. She went all over Scandinavia. She went to Poland. She went to France multiple times. It's more, I think really with Lister, it's more of a case of where didn't she go rather than where she did go. Because even if she isn't spending much time there, she's traveling through a lot of different countries. And obviously how we understand those countries now, like some of them have changed their names, some of them, their borders have changed since the 1820s, 1830s. But yeah, she was a prolific traveller, and both by herself with other people. Well, this is the thing, is she never really travelled by herself because she always had her servants with her. So there's
never forget. She's a wealthy person. Yeah,
exactly. But yeah, she's traveling all over. Yeah, and she's not breaking records, but she's sort of being she is being the first to do things. I can't remember which mountain it is.
I was going to say she did like mountain climbing and stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, she wasn't just traveling around to. Well, like you mentioned, Kit, like with the boots, like she's walking. She's like, her travels are very active trips, seemingly.
Yeah.
When you're talking about breaking records too, like part of this would be like, given her gender nonconformity and how would she define herself? But like a lot of these things are like the first English woman to whatever. I would imagine these are the sorts of records she's breaking or creating, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just trying to find out which mountain it is. I think it's Vignemal that she is the first person to ascend Vignemal. And there was a European prince who tried to lie to official record keepers and say that he got there first, and actually she'd gotten there, I think it was like a day before, and she made the point, she was like, no, I was the first person to do this. Just because you're a prince doesn't mean that you get to mosey in there and say that you got there first. And she makes a real point of going and saying, actually, no, this was me. This is my guide. He and I went up there and we got there first.
So not even the first, that was me just being naive, like assuming she's the first woman. No, she's the first person to do some of these things. Yeah. So she and Anne Walker, they're together. Do you know, of course, you know, how long were they together? Like from their commitment ceremony until Anne Lister died? Like it's like that relationship stuck, right? Like they never separated.
Yeah. 1834, they get married. I mean, they're together before that, but then 1840, Anne dies.
So I think they start their relationship late 1832, and then there's bits where each of them goes off for a bit, and they'll go traveling without the other, and then they come together, and then they have and then they commit to each other in 1834. But they don't celebrate their anniversary on the day that they took the sacrament together. They celebrate their anniversary on a different date. It's a kind of cake that they have that they make on that specific day, but it's not the date that they take the sacrament together. It's a different date.
And so one of the, like, I just did some preparations for this conversation, and one of the descriptions I read of, I forget who said it, of Anne Lister, they're like, so she died, she was 49. Like, I couldn't imagine what she didn't accomplish in her life that she wanted to. Like, the 49 years were full of just like so much travel, like you were saying, like the self-guided education and stuff. Like she, in terms of like a life fulfilled, like it seems like she kind of did everything she wanted to.
I think she did want to publish some of her writing. She definitely did. And I think specifically she wanted to publish her travel writing. And she had Like, she thought of using different pseudonyms, because this is still a point where some women are starting to publish under their own names, but there's a lot who still aren't. And I think she was quite mindful about that and what the impact might be of her doing that would be if she's publishing that during her lifetime. But yes, so she was practicing writing up her travels. She was writing separately from her main journal, in travel notes, in specific travel journals. And what she notes down there is, obviously there's crossover between what she includes in the journal, but it is distinct, and it is written in a specific voice and a specific style. And you can see that she's really starting to think about how she might do that.
Well, and I've come across this so many other times in my recent research for this podcast. Just a wealthy person travels, and then after they come back, they're like, my trip to Italy. Like, this is, I can understand the sort of writing that this would have been. This is a thing that people would just kind of do.
I think the interesting thing is that, like, some of her earliest travel writing is very much itinerary writing. So she is being very, like, really specifically descriptive of, if you go down this road, you will see on your right, you will see on your left. And she's uber specific. I mean, it's
so
great.
A real
She's
sort of like Lonely Planet travel guide sort of
kind
thing.
of, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, she's really utilizing the skills that she's built from being such a regular journal writer, is that she is able to just be so meticulous, and she writes in like little notebooks in pencil while she's traveling, so she can still make these observations, but then she goes and writes it up at the end of the day in a more formal way.
Well, it's interesting you say that was, I'm not surprised to hear that was one of her goals, given how much, I think anyone who writes this many diaries and journals, obviously, I think wants to publish at some point. But I mean, who could have imagined that her diaries would be published and would become like she's now? I think when I was researching my book about the Regency era, I was just like, I bet Anne Lister, she wrote about everything. Like, she's just such a key diarist of this whole time period. If you want to know what was the word on the street, what did people know about whatever topic, because she lived through so many major historical events. Like in England in the early 1800s, there's so much, there's riots, there's so much that's going on. So just to get sort of what was, not that she's an average person, but in the context of a diary, just like a person, what was she thinking? And that brings us to, I think I'm going to call this part of my podcast, Caroline's Corner, where we talk about how does this person intersect with Caroline of Brunswick, who the topic of my book, Rebel of the Regency. And I was really excited, actually, and a little disappointed personally that I hadn't met you before, Sarah, before I finished my final draft of the book, because I did find a couple quotes from it. No, but I'm excited. I found a couple quotes from Anne Lister about Caroline of Brunswick when I was researching, because I was like, Anne Lister must have written something. She was documenting everything. And I found a couple quotes that was mostly, to me, it came across as Anne Lister just being like, I can't, like people who are obsessed with Love Island or something. Anne Lister just writing like, everyone's talking about this, including me. I wish I wasn't, but she's like, I can't stop reading this. This is such exciting, trashy news, like about Caroline of Brunswick and her adultery trial and stuff. So I included those in my book because I really wanted to. But I think you found some other mentions of Caroline of Brunswick.
Yeah, absolutely. One that I found is, again, coming back to Miss Vallance and her and Lister being intimate with each other, is she actually makes a comparison between her and Miss Vallance's relationship and Caroline of Brunswick. And I'm assuming it's her lover, Bergami?
Bartolomeo Bergami, her hot Italian lover, yeah.
Yeah, so she makes, in her journal, she describes the sex that she's having with Miss Vallance to the intimacies between Caroline and Bergami. And that's her opinion from what she's heard in the news.
No, that's amazing. Bergami was, he was sort of, he never came to England because he couldn't, but he was kind of a sex symbol of the time. He was like an intensely handsome Italian man. One person described him as having a mustache as wide as from here to Paris or something like that. He's got this like mustache, but he's super handsome. He's like 6'5" or something. And everybody in England is just like, yes, Caroline, get it. Like, look at this guy you've got. So he was like a famous hot guy. So
that's so interesting thinking about, like, I'm like, because I was thinking, like, who is she framing herself as in this situation? Bergami, clearly Bergami.
The hottest man,
hot guy.
The hottest man in the world. She's just being like, I'm basically Pedro Pascal in this situation, is what she's saying.
I didn't even have the context for this. I was just like,
no, this is great.
Like, get it, Anne.
Yeah, no,
But
at
also
this
get it,
time,
Caroline.
no, it's fantastic. In this time of, in England, like there's Caroline frenzy was everywhere. Like people were obsessed with her trial and her alleged adultery, I should say. Like Madame Tussaud was in England at this time, and like demand was so high, she made a wax figure of Pergami because people were so interested in this like hunk. Like they just wanted to be able to see what he looked like in person. Yeah.
I now need to see if she ever went and saw, like whether she ever saw that, or whether she ever actually saw what Pergami looked like.
I think everybody knew what Pergami looked like. There was drawings in the newspapers and everything. He was, famous. So I love that. I love that just in terms of like, how does she see herself? Like in this situation, she's not the Caroline.
Yeah.
She's the Pergami.
Yeah. I love that for her.
Yeah. No, that's fabulous. And I love... You know, if my book comes out in a paperback, maybe I can have like a addendum.
Yeah, a footnote.
Important Anne Lister information. But in terms of Anne Lister, and for both of you, I think how do you see her, like both of you personally, but also what have you witnessed in terms of her importance just to queer history, like as an icon? Especially there was a TV show, Gentleman Jack, which I think made her story even better known. But I guess I'll ask you each individually, like, what is your understanding of her as a queer icon in 2025?
I mean, I've spoken to so many people about why she's important to them. And it's on so many different levels. There was the BBC made a sort of companion documentary to Gentleman Jack that was called Gentleman Jack Changed My Life, which was, sort of following all these different women and their interactions with Lister's history and the story that's portrayed in the TV show. Some of them realizing that they're queer in different ways, having the courage to come out to family, just all these different myriad ways that they feel that she's impacted their life. And that was made in like 2022, 2023. I think she's an interesting one because I think that there is such a complexity around the way that we talk about Anne Lister, and the fact that there are parts of her history of her story that are very problematic. But I also think that it's quite easy to write her off as the bad guy. I think it's quite easy to write her off as the bad guy. And I think, as I said earlier, like she is complex, she is contradictory. There are things that she says at one point in her life that she then disregards at another point in her life. I think one of the things that is most commonly described about her is that she was Tory and that she voted. Well, obviously she didn't vote Tory because she couldn't vote Tory.
Because she's a woman, technically. Yeah.
Yeah, but she did essentially blackmail her tenants into voting Tory for her. So she kind of had more voting power than the average person. Mm-hmm. But her politics, I mean, we know from work by Susan Lancer, queer historian, that her politics changed over the course of her life. And the way that, I mean, I was looking at this earlier today, the journal entry that we have where I think it's one of her most famous lines, which is, "I love and only love the fairest sex, and thus beloved by them." Earlier in that journal entry, she describes how the way that she communicates with other people has changed over the last 10 years. And the fact that she doesn't feel that she can be as open or as romantic in her letter writing or the way that she's talking to people from when she was 10 years younger. And so I think with Lister, she does have such a big impact, but she is also only one person. And I think the real significance of her journals is we do learn so much about her, and we learn so much about the world that she was inhabiting, and we can contextualize the world that she was living in a little bit better. But we can also use her as a springboard for all the other people around her, and we can learn about the people that she was meeting and their histories as well. And actually, this is something that I'm very interested in, is the fact that she is singular in so many ways, but in her queerness, she's not, because she's she's being intimate with all these other women. It's not just her. She's being intimate with all of them. She's not the only one.
Yeah,
there is
she's
a
not
community.
Just doing it to them, right? She's
Exactly.
Doing it with
It's
them.
not just something that she's kind of forcing on them. She is part of even if we think of community in a different way now, there is a community of people because we can see that through her journals. And I think that's one of the really significant things about her, is how we can see this sort of spider web. And I know that there have been a couple of researchers who've made like the lesbian chart of relationships between Anne Lister and different women. But I think things like that are like, it's funny, but it is also really important because it's like, yeah, there are all these other women that she was being intimate with and do have this shared experience with her, just perhaps in slightly different ways.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think, going right back to the start when we were talking about Anne Lister as quote unquote the first modern lesbian, why are these other women also not the first modern lesbians?
Exactly.
And is it something about Anne Lister's butchness or, kind of hyper visibility in the way that she refuses to conform to femininity that makes people more able to kind of single her out in a way that I think isn't very helpful for thinking about queer history, which is so hyper individualized anyway. Yeah, I think the other thing I would say about Anne Lister's importance to queer history now is that I think, if anything, where the popularity of Gentleman Jack could have given us a kind of nuanced and ambivalent portrayal of Anne Lister's relationship to the histories of sexuality and gender, all it did was cement Anne Lister as lesbian history on its own. And that is something that is both really important to queer women and really frustrating to trans people who also relate to Anne's history. In private trans Facebook groups, you sometimes see people talking about, maybe Anne Lister was actually a trans man. And I don't think that's right. Anne Lister wasn't a trans man. Anne Lister didn't say she was a trans man. But that's the only spaces in which people can voice that view without getting a load of online hate. It's private social media spaces. And there's something about the romanticization of Anne Lister and Anne Walker, which is a real double-edged sword in prioritizing Anne Lister as a figure in the history of sexuality and not the history of gender, when actually in the 18th and 19th century, those are the same thing. Yeah, that's kind of where I think Anne's place in queer history is at right now, entrenching that division between sexuality and gender, which is really ahistorical when we're looking at her period.
Just so listeners know, next week's topic is going to be, we're talking about the ladies of Llangollen, who were actually, maybe in a similar way to how some queer people now might look at Anne Lister as sort of a role model. She kind of looked to them as a role model of just kind of like a way that you can exist outside of the usual gender binary, that two women could live together in a committed way. Could you talk a bit about, either of you, just about Anne Lister's visit to them and what that might have meant to her?
Yes, so Lister and her Aunt Anne visit North Wales in the summer of 1822, and they're travelling sort of all over, but she is really, really intent on going and meeting the ladies of Llangollen, and she is sort of, kind of hovering around the area that they live in for a while. And she manages to get through a local innkeeper, so where she and her aunt are staying. She's able to get an introduction through them, because it's not because they are, at this point, they are celebrities. Like, the ladies of Llangollen were celebrities. They'd had, Byron had visited them. I think Wordsworth visited them at one point. Like, all these really famous literary figures had specifically gone and met them. So yeah, if we're thinking about fandom as well, Anne Lister was being a bit of a fangirl. She was really wanting to go and meet these two people. And yeah, so she managed it. She went and met Sarah Ponsonby and had this little meeting with her because Eleanor Butler had, I think it's kind of the equivalent of cataracts. And she'd had a kind of surgery. So she'd had eye surgery, but she couldn't meet with her. But Lister was able to meet with Sarah Ponsonby, and they have a chat, and they're talking about literature, and they're talking about life. And she writes this very long journal entry about this meeting and the significance of this meeting to her. I think quite a lot of Lister scholars have talked about this specific trip, and I think because it is just so ripe in terms of that, it's so reflective of, I think, how a lot of us now feel about queer people in the past, of wanting that connection, wanting to have that conversation with them. And Lister got to have that. She got to have that conversation with them. If we think of it in sort of anachronistic terms, sort of she got to talk to her queer elders. She got to meet one of her queer elders and have a full-on confab with her. And she gives her a rose from their garden. And she leaves, and she's very affected by it. She feels, and I mean, she describes feeling very low after she's come away from Plasnewydd. because it just has been so impactful to her.
I love that. Just because I was researching for this episode and then for next week's episode, and I realized like, oh my gosh, she got to meet, because the timeline, like they're quite a bit older than her, but they were still around. So exactly like you said, just to be able to meet them. And also, I think it's so, just in terms of Anne Lister's story, queer history in general, I think just to always be finding and elevating and reminding everybody, like, look at these queer icons in history. Like it wasn't just invented in the 20th century. Like gender nonconforming people have always been around. I think that's so important for people to know and to acknowledge and to find these people and learn about them. And even like Anne Lister, who is like a chaotic, I think I said at the beginning, just a real problematic fave, but it's like the fandom that she has, I appreciate, because she is one of the queer people from this time period who we know the most about because of these diaries. But then for her to look back to the ladies of Llangollen to be like, wow, these people are similar to me. And for her to have that kind of role model, like in the ladies of Llangollen, I don't know who they were looking back to, but like there have been these sorts of these role models for people. And I think it's just really valuable to keep elevating their stories, even as the Anne Lister thing is so, like you were describing, Kit, how she's become sort of an avatar for these very contemporary discussions, which kind of takes away from like, but who was she really? Like she was a complicated person with all these conflicting parts to her. Anyway, I'm just saying, I think it's so moving that she got to meet the ladies of Llangollen. And I think that's because I know people go there for similar tourism reasons as well, like just in terms of like queer history, places you can go. There's so few people we know about where there have been so many queer people in history, but their stories just aren't well known. And these are kind of two, and I'm happy to bring them on this podcast to talk about them. I want to ask both of you if you have, because if people are like, wow, these two people, they know so much stuff. I know that you both do work in the field of queer history. How could people get in touch with you if they want to work with you in some way, or to just read what you're doing?
Yeah, find me on Instagram, Kit Heyam Writer. Find me on Blue Sky, KR Him. Find me on my website. Keep up to date with stuff that I'm writing and stuff that I'm doing with museums. I have a new book which I've almost finished, so you can take a look out for that. Yeah, Sarah, what about you?
I've got a website, sarahwingrove.com, where I have everything linked. I've had quite a few of the different papers that I've given about Lister and her world have been recorded. So if you want to go and watch those back, then you can. I'm also on Blue Sky. I think it's saz.wingrove or sazwingrove at Blue Sky. I pop things on there. I wanted to say before we finished, so obviously this is vulgar history.
Yes.
I did look up, because I know that Lister said she described a lot of things as being vulgar. So I looked up how many times she said vulgar, like described things as vulgar in her journals, because I thought you'd appreciate it.
Yeah.
And from what I could find, I think she, in the entirety of her journals, she describes things as being vulgar 225 times. The highest count is in 1824 when she describes things as vulgar 22 times. The only caveat, so I think it brings it down a little bit, is 14 of those instances across the journals she's specifically referencing vulgar or common fractions. So I think
mathematical vulgarity.
There's still over 200 instances where she's describing people, places, and things as being vulgar.
So this is the perfect podcast to talk about her on.
That's so cool.
She would be so angry about it. Well, thank you both so much. I just want to remind the listeners as well. So my book, Rebel of the Regency, The Scandalous Saga of Caroline of Brunswick, Britain's Uncrowned Queen, is coming out in North America in February 2026. And you can get all the information about that at rebeloftheregency.com. And I'm crossing my fingers and hoping that some UK publisher publishes it too, because like it's about your country. So like, why wouldn't somebody jump on this? So hopefully they will as well. Anyway, Kit Heyam, Sarah Wingrove, thank you so much for joining me. Yeah. Well, here's the thing. I mean, I would love to see it in the UK, but also I'm just like, because I know people are really weird about the royal family there. So we'll see how they take it if it does show up.
I'd be interested in reading it.
Well, I mean, just to learn about pergamy. I have a picture of him in it. So you can see the mustache.
Yes.
Anyway, thank you both so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Anne.
Hi, hello, it's me again. Just kidding about ending the episode. I realized after I finished recording with Kit and Sarah that I had forgotten to get their thoughts about a score for Anne Lister. So if you're a new listener to this podcast, or if you just like reminders of things, at the end of these episodes, where we're talking about a person's life from birth to death, I like to score them on what we call the Fredegund Memorial Scandaliciousness Scale. And so I've been doing this since 2019, since the podcast started, and I can't stop now. So we score everybody in 4 different categories. And it's really important this season that I remember to do this, because with the whole Regency vibes of it all, I've decided I want to reward the diamond of the season at the end of this Regency Era series, like they do on Bridgerton. And so we need to get these scores. And so the diamond of the season is not going to necessarily be the person with the highest score, but that will be part of the consideration. Like on Dancing with the Stars, there's the judges' score, and then there's the audience vote. So I think we're going to have these scores, and then at the end of the series, or towards the end of the series, you can all help vote for who's the diamond of the season. But I mean, come on, Anne Lister, we need to give this a score, this episode. So what the categories are the first category is scandaliciousness, which is how scandalous did Anne Lister, how did people perceive her in her time and place? The second category is scheminess, which can be in the form of like literal schemes, or just somebody who's very ambitious and really flexible in the face of life's twists and turns. Significance in their time, significance to history is the next category. And the final category is what we call the sexism bonus, which for some people, that's where they can make up some scores they might not get in other categories. But it's really thinking, how much did living in a patriarchal society impact this person, and how much more could they have maybe done if that wasn't the situation? So I emailed both Kit and Sarah, and so I'm going to, my cat has thoughts as well. She just walked across the laptop keyboard as I was trying to open this email. That's Hepburn. She's my cat. To new listeners, please know she's great. So here are Kit's thoughts for the first category, scandaliciousness. Kit says, when you combine the relationships with the dress and the financial independence, I reckon this is a solid 10 out of 10. Sarah says, I'm going to give her an 8 because I think Lister was also very good at conforming when she needed to, and there are so many instances of her pointing to others and their scandalous behavior to distract from her own. So I'm going to average that out. A 10 from Kit, an 8 from Sarah. I'm going to say 9 out of 10 for scandaliciousness. The next category is scheminess. Kit says, I mean, this is how she got most of her hookups, including with plenty of quote-unquote straight women. 9 is what Kit says. Sarah says 10 out of 10 for Miss Anne Lister. Ever the planner, she had a scheme for pretty much everything, and they would generally be incredibly thought out and meticulous in nature. I would say the scheminess of just inventing her code, frankly. So 10 out of 10 for scheminess for Anne Lister. The next category is significance, and Kit says, her journals are second to none, even without the queerness, so 10 out of 10 for significance. And Sarah says, I agree with Kit. Her journals reveal so much about not only queer life in late Georgian and early Victorian eras, but life in general and all its minutiae in great detail. She is also such a significant figure for so many people now, and her impact cannot be underplayed. 10 out of 10. I agree. 10 out of 10 significance. The fourth category, sexism. Kit says, I think she definitely experienced it, but wasn't held back by it as much as many women at the time, maybe a 4. Sarah says, I would argue that sexism impacted her in ways we do not always immediately see, because we think of her as so singular, but she still experienced it much like any other woman of her era. It frustrated her to no end when she was denied access to spaces or had her efforts undermined because she was a woman. Absolutely, she challenged sexism and often succeeded, but it still shaped her life and those of her partners. 7 out of 10. So I'm going to go with a higher score there. We're going to go with a 7, to round up with Sarah's higher score, which gives Anne Lister a total score of 36 out of 40. In terms of this series, the Regency Era series, this is a high score for now, but we've only done 2 episodes so far. But still, I think this puts her up in the top 10 of all time people we've ever profiled on this podcast, which I think is correct, because we give great marks to people who are schemy and scandalous, especially when they're also significant. And that's Anne Lister's whole vibe. Like, literally, she's in the top 10 now. If you go to my website, which is vulgarhistory.com, at the top there's a button that says scores. And so you can see all the scores of all the people who, from all the past episodes, to see where your faves might land. And so this Anne Lister is just slightly above fellow queer Georgian era person, Le Chevalier d'Eon, who had a 35.5. I'm just looking for other. Mary Queen of Scots, who had some queer elements to her story. She would wear trousers sometimes, and she was very close to her ladies in waiting in a very good friend's way, perhaps. She also has a 36, same as Anne Lister. And Jinga of Ndongo, who we profiled, is also a queer figure who had some gender bending in her story as well, has a 36 as well. So I'm delighted to kick this series off with such a high score for Miss Anne Lister, lesbian icon. Next week on the podcast, if things go according to plan, which they don't always, but I think they will this time, we're going to be looking at some more queer people from this era. So stay tuned for that next week. Thank you so much for listening to Vulgar History. You can find out more about my book, Rebel of the Regency, which is about Caroline of Brunswick, who Anne Lister, as we discussed, even Anne Lister was writing about her in her diary. Nobody could not talk about Caroline of Brunswick, the Rebel of the Regency Era. My book, you can get all the information about it at rebeloftheregency.com. And if you pre-order it, it comes out in February in North America and hopefully at around the same time in the UK as well and other places. If you pre-order it and send me a picture of your receipt, then you can get a free membership to my Patreon, a free member to my Substack, and also a paper doll of Caroline of Brunswick. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to Vulgar History. Until next time, keep your pants on and your tits out. Vulgar History is researched, scripted, and hosted by Anne Foster. Editor is Christina Lumagi. Theme music is by the Severn Duo. Regency Era artwork by Karen Moynihan. Social media videos by Magdalena Denson. Transcripts of this podcast are available at vulgarhistory.com by Aveline Malik. You can get early ad-free episodes of Vulgar History by becoming a paid member of our Patreon at patreon.com/AnneFosterWriter. Vulgar History merchandise is available at vulgarhistory.com/store for Americans and at vulgarhistory.redbubble.com for everyone else. Follow us on social media at Vulgar History Pod. Get in touch with me at vulgarhistorypod@gmail.com.
There are vampires out there. They walk among you, shoulder to shoulder in the dark. Heading to work, heading home, going to the bar. It's a life just like anyone else's, and I have grown used to it. To the darkness, to the moon, to the taste of blood on my tongue. But vampires are dying out. We are a fading kind, and I am the first one created in so long, and that is a dangerous thing to be. Those who came before me, elders of all stripes, they do not want to see our kind gone, and they will do anything to keep their power. And for myself, and for Grace, who created me, that is a sword that hangs above our heads. And the worst person of all carries our secret, and he will use it however he sees fit. Who do you look to when things are at their darkest? From the creators of Parkdale Haunt comes Woodbine, a podcast about monsters, dreams, and changes, those you want and those you never saw coming. Season 2 arrives September 24th, distributed by Realm.
There are names that echo in the world of true crime, names that carry unanswered questions. Oakley Carlson, a 5-year-old girl who deserved safety, protection, and love, yet the system built to protect her failed, and Oakley disappeared. Her community still calls her name.
Or Ellen Greenberg, found in her locked apartment with 20 stab wounds, a case declared a suicide. But how does a locked apartment tell two different stories at once?
These are not just cases we have covered. They are people. They were loved, and they mattered.
Their stories deserve to be told with care, with depth, with truth.
I'm Ashley.
And I'm Ricky.
We are the husband and wife duo behind Crime Salad.
Every week we uncover stories of the missing, the silenced, the misunderstood. We ask the questions that were left behind. We refuse to let these stories be forgotten.
Because behind every case is a family holding on, a community seeking answers, and a story that deserves to be heard.
We invite you to listen to Crime Salad,
your healthy portion of true crime, wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome and enter if you dare. Hi, I'm Hallie Keeper.
And I'm Allison Leiby. And together, we're the hosts of Ruined, a scary movie podcast where Hallie tells me the grisly details of a haunting new horror film each week.
Whether you're a terror hound like me or a scaredy cat like Allison, we've got so many thrills, chills, and obviously kills to share with you in every episode.
It's the podcast that'll have you saying, that was so funny. I should not have listened to it at night with all the lights off.
From the greats like The Exorcist and Poltergeist to modern classics such as Hereditary and Get Out to the freakiest new releases like A Quiet Place and Terrifier, we ruin them all and will leave you howling, mostly from laughter, sometimes because you're turning into a werewolf.
Ooh. Listen along as I try and guess the movie's twist, predict who will survive, and answer the hardest question of all. What would you do?
So please listen to new episodes of Ruined every Tuesday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
And whatever you do, we're begging you, please
keep it spooky.